All right, well, this morning I'm going to do what we normally do. I've done this for a long time, and I was just talking with my brother-in-law yesterday about this story. He and I first heard it before it came out 36 years ago at a conference that Steve Brown was at, and he read this story, and I remember how both of us were so deeply touched and transformed by it because it has a powerful message in it. And as we get ready to read the story about the boy who loved music, I would really appreciate your prayers for my in-laws. My mother-in-law is going to rehab, acute rehab today, and she's improved somewhat. My father-in-law not. So he is not doing well at all, and it's very serious. And so just would appreciate your prayers for both of them, because they're both going through an awful lot right now, and we just need God's grace to sustain them and the whole family right now. But as we go into this story, it's told that fiction sometimes is the telling of a story that's not true in a way that makes it seem true. And the story, it is true, but the truth is deeper than the story. It is myth in the deeper sense of the word. Jesus loved to tell parables, and sometimes parables and stories can tell a whole lot more than just a sermon. Sometimes myth touches a deeper truth in us than philosophy, and that is particularly true when you're talking about radical ideas, especially the concepts of grace. Some people, when they began to understand God's grace and they began to see grace as it really unfolds in the Lord Jesus and in the Gospels, people think maybe you've gone off the deep end. Maybe you're telling it and making it better than it really is. But this story tells us that there's no way that it could be any better than it really is, because it is the best and greatest news the world has ever heard. Because there once was a little boy named Ebed. Ebed had music in his heart, but he wanted it in his hands. He wanted to play the piano. In fact, he wanted to play the piano more than anything in the world. Now, no one knew it, of course. Boys aren't supposed to play the piano. They're supposed to fish and camp, play sports. And Ebed liked all of those things, but more than anything, he wanted to play the piano. But Ebed's family couldn't afford a piano, couldn't afford piano lessons for him. So when his friends talked about learning to play the piano, Ebed would laugh and make fun of them. Playing the piano, he would say, it's for girls. It's more fun to play ball. And pretty soon you guys will all be wearing dresses and carrying purses. And then Ebed would walk off with a smirk on his face. But inside, he knew the truth. More than anything in the world, he wanted to play the piano. Sometimes when no one was around, he would sit down at the piano at school and try to play. He really wasn't bad for someone who had never had a lesson. In fact, his untutored playing made Ebed think that he might have some talent. One day at the local ice cream parlor, Ebed noticed his friends and their piano teacher eating ice cream and laughing together. It was obvious that to Ebed, the piano teacher not only taught his students to play the piano, but he was also their friend. They, of course, didn't see Ebed standing by the door. They were too absorbed in one another. Ebed stood there for the longest time, afraid they would notice him, but also in a strange way, afraid they wouldn't. After a while, Ebed left the ice cream parlor. He felt very sad. He kept up a good front in the parlor, but if anyone had noticed him, they would have noticed the tears welling up in his eyes. Ebed ran down to the lake, where he went sometimes when he wanted to be alone. And once he was sure nobody was around, he sat down on a rock and he began to cry. Ebed cried and he thought for a long time. He thought about how much he wanted to play the piano, and he thought about the piano teacher. He knew his family was poor, and there were some things he just couldn't have. But still, it would be nice to have a friend like the piano teacher. All of a sudden, Eby heard a sound behind him. Turning quickly, he found to his horror that the piano teacher was standing there, smiling at him. "Where did you come from?" Eby asked more harshly than he intended. "I noticed you at the ice cream parlor," the piano teacher replied. "You looked lonely, and I thought I would follow you. Do you mind if I sit down for a while?" "Suit yourself," Eby said, "but I did come here to be alone, and I did invite you." Well, the piano teacher sat down on the same rock with Eby, and for a long time didn't say a word. When the teacher did speak, his voice was soft and understanding. "Ebed, would you like to play the piano?" "What makes you think that? The piano is for girls and Eby's voice trailed off as he looked into the piano teacher's eyes. He couldn't lie. Yes, Eby admitted, very slowly. "But I would like to play the piano. In fact, sir, I've always wanted to play the piano, but I don't have the money to pay for lessons." "Well, maybe I can do something to help." "Yeah?" Eby responded. Like what?" "Well, I could be your friend, and friends don't charge for helping. If I was your friend, I could teach you to play the piano." "That would be great!" Eby shouted, jumping up to his excitement. He almost fell off the rock into the lake. The piano teacher caught Eby just in time, and they both started to laugh, and Eby couldn't remember a time he had laughed so hard. "You know my name," Eby remarked. I can't believe you know my name." "Yes," the piano teacher agreed. "I've known your name for a long time." "Well, if we're going to be friends, I guess I ought to know your name too." "It's Emmanuel," the teacher said. "But my best friends call me Manny. I hope you will call me Manny too." Eby decided that day he was going to be the best piano player who ever lived. Others, he thought to himself, they don't think playing the piano is that important, but it's what I've wanted all my life. And I'll work until I'm the best piano student the teacher has, and he will be very proud of me. But over the next few weeks, Eby found that playing the piano was not as easy as he had supposed. He thought he would be well on his way only after a few lessons. Nobody, however, had told him about scales, the hours of practice, and the simple little tunes beginners have to play. One day, after an extremely frustrating lesson, Eby turned to his teacher dejectedly. "I'll never get this right, Manny. I keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and I can see it in your eyes. You're about ready to give up on me, and I understand. It's all my fault." "Ebed," Emmanuel's smile made his words almost unnecessary. "I will never give up on you. Friends don't give up on friends." "What if I leave and I don't come back?" "Ebed, if you never came back, you are still my friend. I will always be here to give you lessons." And then, with a grin, Emmanuel asked, "Do you still want to play the piano?" "Of course I want to play. I've always wanted to play, but nobody ever told me it was going to be this hard." "Did I tell you it would be easy?" "No, sir. But I did say you would learn to play the piano and that I would be your friend. We're working on the first, and the second will always be." Emmanuel sat down on the piano bench beside Eby. "Now let's look at that piece you're working on." Well, Eby sheepishly got out his beginner's book and turned to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Eby blushed to show his teacher that he'd gotten no further in the book. "Play it for me," Emmanuel said. But I can only play the treble line well." "It doesn't matter. Play it for me anyway." So Eby began to peck out the melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Well, to be perfectly honest, that little star didn't twinkle very brightly. Eby kept missing notes and stopping often to make sure his fingers were in the right position. His rhythm was halting, and then to his surprise, Eby heard the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. He looked to his right, and Emmanuel was adding to Eby's notes with his right hand. And then, without missing a beat, the piano teacher eased himself around behind Evie, encircled him from behind with his arms, and added bass notes with his left hand as well. Evie continued to play his one-note melody, but now it sounded totally different. Emmanuel's melody wove into Evie's single line, transforming the simple melody into a complex symphony of sound. Evie was so fascinated that he almost forgot to keep playing. The harmonies on top of the other soared in an increasingly complicated arrangement, sounding almost like an orchestra. Soon Evie was totally lost in the wonder and the beauty of the music coming from the piano. When Emmanuel and Evie finished playing the piece, Evie felt tears stinging in his eyes. And through the tears, he could see Emmanuel smiling. "We make pretty good music together," Emmanuel said. "You don't mean we, do you?" "Yes, Ebed, we made the music together. You did what you could, and I did the rest." And then Emmanuel invited Evie into his study. Now, over the weeks, Evie had enjoyed sitting and talking with Emmanuel as much as he enjoyed learning to play the piano. In fact, if the truth were known, Evie enjoyed his time with Emmanuel more than anything else in the world. Emmanuel lived in a large house close to the lake where he and Evie first met. The house was almost overpowering in its size, and Evie always felt as if he were visiting the house of a great nobleman. At least, that's how it felt and how he felt, until Emmanuel would answer the door. Then the cold, foreboding nature of the house was transformed by the presence of the teacher. And Evie felt he was visiting a good friend. But then, Evie often thought any place where Manny lived could not help but be wonderful. Emmanuel was obviously quite wealthy and had wonderful taste. Evie was too young to understand the intricacies of interior design, but he was old enough to know that the house was just right. From the paintings, which hung in the large entrance hall, and the thick carpet on the floors to the grand piano on which Emmanuel gave lessons, well, everything just fit together, and it made Evie feel very, very comfortable. One thing always puzzled Evie, but whenever he was with Manny, he forgot to ask him about it. Evie knew that Manny had a lot of students, but Evie never saw any of them. In fact, when Evie was with Manny, there was never anyone else around, and even more surprising, Manny never seemed to be in a hurry to get to another lesson. Often Evie would expect his time to be limited, but it never was. Today wasn't any different. Manny seemed to have all the time in the world. Emmanuel's book-lined study, where they were now sitting, felt right to Evie too. The study was just off the studio where Emmanuel taught his students, and they were sitting in easy chairs. Emmanuel's big frame filling his chair, and Evie's small frame almost swallowed up by his. Evie's feet barely even touched the floor. "Ebed," Emmanuel began when they were settled, "you said I had made the music, or at least you insinuated it." "Well," Evie replied, you did make the music. You didn't need my little single line to produce the kind of music you played today." "Oh, well, that's true. I could make music by myself. But I've chosen not to do that. I've chosen instead to work with my friends and to help them make the music." "Like today?" "Yes, like today. You played as best you could, and I made up for the rest. Ebed, from now on, it will always be that way. Whenever you do what you can, I will always make up for the lack. If you do nothing, I will still make up for the rest. And when you're older and play with far greater competence than you do now, you will still make some mistakes. Just remember that even then, when others think you don't need me, I will still make up for the lack. And there's one other thing. I want you to remember this always. It won't mean a lot to you right now, but later you will think of it and you will be glad." "Well, what's that, Manny?" Evie asked, feeling a little uncomfortable. "Oh, don't look so pained," Emmanuel laughed reassuringly. "It's good. I want you to always remember that you are my piano student. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter how well or how poorly you play the piano, you will always be my student. And Ebed, you can hang your hat on this. Someday, perhaps in another place and time, you will be able to play the piano exactly the way I play the piano. And even then, you will still be my student and my friend. Then, to emphasize his words, Emmanuel leaned forward. Do you understand what I'm saying? I think I do, Ebed responded. Ebed, I love you far more than you can possibly understand right now. That will never, ever stop, no matter what else happens. I give my life for my students, and because of that, they are always my students. Weeby thought a lot about what Manny had said to him that day. In fact, he never forgot it for the rest of his life. Well, but once he almost did. As Eby continued piano lessons, he found others teased him the same way he had teased Manny's students before he started taking piano lessons. We don't see you at the ball field much anymore, one boy snickered at him one day after school. Well, I've been busy, Eby responded somewhat hesitantly. Playing the piano, huh? Yeah, mostly. What have you become, some kind of fairy? You and the girls ought to be getting along just fine. Well, that was just the beginning. Soon the other boys joined in the teasing, making fun not only of Eby's piano playing, but of Eby's piano teacher as well. At first, Eby was angry with him, but after a while, he started listening to and believing some of the things they said. Little boys need friends, and Eby was losing his rapidly. Eby visited Manny's house less frequently, and he almost stopped practicing the piano altogether, even though he'd been making some genuine progress. The more he'd practiced, the better he had played. But now he was almost back to the level of a beginner. He was so ashamed that he finally stopped going to see Emmanuel. Weeks passed, and even though his friends had stopped making fun of him, Eby felt miserable. Sometimes he'd look at the piano at school and think about playing, but it was just too costly. At night, Eby would think about Manny, and sometimes he would cry. He didn't know why he cried, but he did know that he missed Manny. Then, before finally falling asleep, Eby would make all kinds of promises to himself about getting back to the piano and going to see Manny. But when the morning came, he always forgot about the promises. Manny asked about you yesterday, Martus, one of Emmanuel's other students, told Eby one day at recess. He said to tell you not to forget what he told you. Eby didn't know what Martus meant until later that afternoon when he remembered that special talk in Manny's study. Eby felt the tears well up in his eyes. Instead of going home, he went to Emmanuel's house. I've been expecting you, Emmanuel said as he opened the door. Are you ready for your next lesson? But I haven't played in so many months. Eby looked down and pretended to find something quite interesting in the rock floor of the porch. Doesn't matter. You're always my piano student. That hadn't changed. You may have been a poor one for the past few months, Emmanuel smiled, but you are my student. Come on in, and we can begin where we left off. Well, it was the best piano lesson Eby ever had. In fact, Eby thought at home later, I'm almost glad I turned away from Manny and his piano lessons. If I'd never turned away, I'd never know how much Emmanuel loves me and how much he wants me to continue the piano lessons. Well, it was a growth experience for Eby. Whenever his friends teased him, he would remember how he had caved into their criticism and how Emmanuel still loved him. And his sadness would be transformed into joy and thankfulness. But the trouble Eby had with those who didn't understand the importance of playing the piano was minor compared to the trouble he had with his fellow piano students. Eby thought that once he'd become a piano student, well, he'd become a part of a family of musicians where everyone understood and helped each other play the piano better. It was not to be. You're doing it all wrong. shouted a little girl who had overheard him practicing on the piano at school. "You're playing soft when you ought to be playing loud, and you're playing loud when you ought to be playing soft." "Oh, your rhythm is all off," criticized another student who had heard Evie play. "How do you ever expect to play the piano if you can't tell the difference between 4/4 and 3/4 time?" "You hit 3 wrong notes," another exclaimed. "If you don't start playing the right notes, you're going to disappoint the teacher, and after all he has done for you." The rest of us have been talking, and we've decided that if you don't get better, you're going to shame all of us. "If you're ever going to play the piano properly, you must practice at home, not at school," one of the students informed Evie one day after class. But I don't have a piano at home," protested Evie. "Well, why don't you get your parents to buy you one?" "We don't have the money. That's why." Well, there was a long silence. But Evie noticed a look of disdain on his fellow student's face as he walked away. He knew the boy felt that Evie should quit taking piano lessons if he couldn't afford a piano. One afternoon, when Evie had finished his lessons, Emmanuel said to him, "Ebed, you seem sad. What's the matter?" "Oh, nothing," Evie replied, training his words with the grimace on his face. "The others bothering you?" "Sometimes." "They bother me sometimes, too." "But you don't hear all the things they say, Manny." And then Emmanuel smiled. "Evie, I know my students. The girl who told you you needed to play soft when you were playing loud and loud when you ought to be playing soft is only criticizing you because she's doing so badly with her own lessons. And the boy who criticized your rhythm hasn't been to a lesson in almost 3 months. He thinks if he points out your mistakes, people will not notice his own. And the boy who told you the wrong notes is so busy telling others about their wrong notes, he doesn't have much time to play himself. If he played the piano very much, which he doesn't, he'd probably hit more wrong notes than you do. And the boy who told you to buy a piano with money you don't have has 3 pianos, but he hardly ever plays any of them. He thinks that having pretty pianos is more important than playing them. People always admire his pianos, and he thinks it's the same thing as admiring his piano playing. And the others who suggested you were hurting the reputation of all the students, they're very insecure about their own piano playing. Your playing is different, and other students don't like piano players who are different. And Evie, the comment about disappointing me is not true. Never let another piano student tell you that you disappoint me. If I'm disappointed, I'll tell you. When I'm pleased, I'll tell you that too. But I am the only one who knows whether I'm disappointed or pleased. Well, Evie felt a whole lot better after Emmanuel told him about the other students. In fact, sort of felt a little superior to the others. That is until Emmanuel said to him, "Now, Evie, I'm telling you all of this so you will remember that I have made you my student, even with your mistakes, because I love you. But I don't love you any more than I love the others. The only reason I told you about them, and if I chose, I could tell them a lot about you, is so you'll remember that there isn't a single piano student in the world who doesn't make some serious errors. Their problem is that they tried to pretend they were better than you. Now, you know the truth. Now remember it. Don't make their mistake. Remember how you forgot about me for so long? How you quit practicing and how I accepted you when you wanted to resume your lessons? Remember how I never stopped loving you? I will do the same for them. All of my piano students are equal because they have the same teacher. You must never think you're better than the others just because you know the truth. And Evie, never forget that I make up the difference for them just as I do for you. Well, after that, Evie loved Emmanuel more than he ever had. When he walked away from the teacher's house, he felt free. He didn't have to pretend to be a wonderful piano student, nor did he have to pretend not to care. He didn't have to point out the mistakes of the other students in order to feel better about himself. After all, the piano teacher loved all the piano students, and all Ebed had to do was stay close to the piano teacher. Every spring, Emmanuel had a recital at his home for his students' parents. Ebed had worked for weeks on his piece, and his mother had bought him a brand new suit with some money she had saved. Ebed felt wonderful until he got up to play. When he started to walk toward the piano and saw all the people waiting for him to perform, he panicked. He wanted to run. But when he looked over at Emmanuel, his teacher gave him a thumbs up sign. No way am I going to disappoint Manny, Ebed thought. But as Ebed began to play, he forgot the music. He played all the wrong notes. Once, he even lost his place and had to start all over. And when Ebed got up from the piano bench, he didn't dare look to the audience or his parents, or especially Emmanuel. He'd wanted to do so much better, but instead, he disappointed everyone. Ebed was so miserable, he didn't notice that the audience was applauding. In fact, they applauded for almost 5 whole minutes, shouting, "Encore! Encore!" Ebed didn't hear it. He'd already walked out the back door and headed down to the lake where he sat on his rock, and he cursed himself. Hours passed, and the night grew cold. And suddenly, Ebed heard a rustle behind him, and he turned to find Emmanuel standing there. "I really botched it." "Yeah, you really botched it." But they didn't know. "What do you mean they didn't know?" "Of course they knew. I'm so ashamed. I can never face them again. And Manny, I'm even more ashamed to face you. You loved me. You trusted me. You taught me to play the piano, and I let you down. Please don't look at me that way, Manny. I don't believe I can stand it." "Ebed," Manny said, taking an uninvited seat on the rock by the boy, "you misinterpret my look. I'm not disappointed in you. You must remember that I've been teaching piano for a long time, longer than you could possibly know. Do you think your performance surprised me?" "Well, I guess not." "But no buts, child. Your vanity has been hurt, but you haven't failed me. Ebed, I love you. I've told you that, but you forgot." "I guess I did," Ebed whispered. "And you forgot something else." "What's that, Manny?" "Remember I told you I would always make up for your lack? I did that tonight." You mean?" "That's right. You didn't play as well as you will play someday, and perhaps you didn't play as well as you could have played, but you played. And I made up for the difference. The audience heard the music, not the mistakes." Ebed jumped up and started to dance on the rock. Emmanuel laughed heartily, but managed to caution Ebed. "You're going to fall off this rock if you're not careful, and I don't relish going swimming on this kind of night." Well, that night was one of the most important nights of Ebed's life, second only to the evening he'd met Emmanuel. Ebed began to practice playing the piano far more than he had previously. In fact, in the years to come, Ebed botched some other concerts. Sometimes he got angry at Emmanuel. Sometimes he thought about giving up on the whole thing, and even walked away a few more times. But Emmanuel was always there, loving him and helping him make music. Might wonder what happened to that little boy. Well, that's the best part. Ebed grew up. He became a world-class pianist. He came to be known, as one critic put it, as the essence of perfection. In concert after concert all over the world, Ebed played to standing room only audiences. And when he finished a concert, after the applause had died away, Ebed would smile and remember that no one had heard his mistakes. And later, he would always thank Emmanuel for making up for the lack. One evening, after a concert in New York, when he was almost 70 years old, Ebed was dining with some friends when he felt a mild pain in his chest. He marked it up to indigestion, but as the evening wore on, the pain became more and more acute. And halfway through the dinner, he collapsed, and his friends called an ambulance. Ebed was only half conscious when they put him on the stretcher and they placed him in the ambulance, but then he woke up. It was a strange kind of awake, because he seemed to be looking at the whole scene in the ambulance, from a different perspective. One of the attendants looked at the other and sighed. "We've lost him." "You haven't lost me!" Ebed wanted to shout. "I'm right here." But before Ebed could speak, the sound of a piano caught his ears. The most beautiful music he'd ever heard. Turning around, he found himself at Emmanuel's house. Now, maybe it wasn't Emmanuel's house, but it looked the same and even more beautiful than he remembered. Drawn through the front door by the music, Ebed found Emmanuel playing a magnificent concerto at the grand piano. Ebed listened. He was entranced. When Emmanuel finished, neither he nor Ebed spoke for a moment. Then turning to Ebed, Emmanuel broke the silence. "Now, it's your turn." "Me?" "Yes, you," Emmanuel laughed. "And I believe you're in for a surprise." Well, Ebed sat down at the piano, and as he placed his hands on the keys, he felt a freedom and power he had never felt before. Every nuance, every note, every rhythm was perfect. The music soared and it filled the room, and out of the corner of his eyes, Ebed could see Emmanuel smiling as a father smiles when his son performs perfectly. Ebed's heart beat excitedly. "Ebed," Emmanuel said softly, "now you play just the way I play." "Yes," Ebed replied, smiling. "I know. And I have a new name for you, Ebed. Before, you've been called Ebed, which means servant. But now, your name is Deror, which means freedom. Now the music is yours forever. You are home." Father, thank you for this story of your grace. All of us in this room find ourselves just like Ebed so many ways. Sometimes we quit going to your house. Sometimes we stop meeting with you. Sometimes we look at ourselves in the mirror and we feel so disappointed and ashamed, and the things we know that we've done that we shouldn't have, or things that we left undone that we should have done, said, thought. But thank you. The truth remains that you're always our Father. You're always our brother, our Savior. The door is always open. And you're always, forever, through all the ages to come, our friend. May we never forget your grace. May we be encouraged by this story. And as we get ready to partake of communion, Lord Jesus, may we celebrate it with gratitude. No matter where we've been this week, what we've gone through, what we've faced in life, the ups, the downs, the ins and outs, the disappointments, the failures, and even the successes. May we know that it is all counted up to and because of your exceeding grace and love for us, that you sustain us and keep us through all things. So as we celebrate communion this morning, may we do so with a grateful heart. We thank you for your mercy and grace. In Jesus' name.